trick chassis 9-inch assembly and installation. Here I go. Today, we're finally putting our trick chassis 9-inch rear end together and putting it in our twin turbo Camaro. Chaos Theory. So before we get started on this, I wanted to go over a few things, tell you what I've got here, why I've got what I've got here, and who's responsible for it. The original plan was I really wanted to beat on the 10 bolt a little bit more and see how far we could push it. So far the best it's gone is like a 1.5 60 foot. And what was my time? I think it was a 683 or 684 in the 8th. And that was, and keep in mind guys, the reason we're going so slow is because I've been doing like a real gradual launch, rolling the boost in real slow to try to keep from breaking this thing. But it has gone a lot further than, well, pretty much 99% of the internet said that it was going to go. If you go back and look at past videos, the only real modification we have done to this is a mini spool. Other than that, it's stock. It's been stock this whole time. It's the late 89 and up rear end, so it has the 28 spline axles instead of 26 like the 89 and back. It's got the stock 323 gears in it, and it's put up with all the abuse that we've given it. But the plan was to beat on it a little more, but when I got sick with COVID and the issues that I've had since, we had to call the season early this year, and I didn't want to wait till next year to finish breaking this thing. So we've just decided to go ahead over the winter. We got enough money saved up, ordered this trick chassis rear end, so we're just going to go ahead and get it put in. Now, first things first, I want to give a huge shout out to Matt Walter, and I want to say he just recently did a video putting one of these in his 3rd gen, and he is responsible for trick chassis, for me getting a trick chassis, because I'd never heard of trick chassis. And here's the deal with that, guys. It's basically the same design other than the torque arm mount as a quick performance rear end. The difference is the price. So there's a lot of things that are optional on the quick performance rear end that you get just standard equipment for the same price on this rear end, such as internal gusseting and the 1/4 inch thick tubes. Quick performance actually charges extra for both of those things. They're included for the base price on the trick chassis rear ends. The next thing I wanted to go over is why I chose a fabricated rear end. Well, for those who don't know, the fabricated rear end like this is way lighter and way stronger than just a factory style 9-inch rear end. So that's the reason for, you know, the upgrade. I think it's like a $100 upgrade to go with a fabricated instead of like just a stock style Ford 9-inch rear end. But if you're planning on really beating on this thing, it's worth it, and you're going to save a lot of weight. So I pretty much got all the options as far as the housing goes, except for the extended bracket. So my brackets have 4 hole positions. They do have an option where you can get, I think it's 11 holes. So you've got more adjustability with your anti-squat, you know, your lower control arm angle and everything. The only thing is they're narrowed brackets. They're not stock width. And I'm running offset lower control arms in the back, so I wasn't quite sure how that was going to work out. So that's why I didn't get that. But I did get the back bracing. I also got my anti-roll bar mounts. I got them welded on, so I won't have to use the clamp-on style. I actually can't use the clamp-on style now because of these huge back braces that I got. So I've already installed some of this stuff. We got the big new Ford end pieces here. So it's the big bearing new style Ford end pieces. And this is another real big area right here that I wanted to go over. So I'm aware a lot of people have had trouble with mounting tubular torque arms, things like that. Well, I'm using a UMI tubular torque arm, and they actually specify on their website that they work good with the Moser style torque arm bracket. So the quick performance rear ends, they have their own fabricated bracket, and I've heard, you know, people have trouble getting the tubular torque arms to mount up to those. Well, that's one area where Trick Chassis went kind of different, and they actually use the forged, or not forged, the cast Moser style torque arm bracket. And this is extremely heavy duty too. So we got that. Supposedly the torque arm will work fine with that. The only other thing is, I know some people with the 9 inches have trouble with firewall clearance, or not firewall, but transmission tunnel clearance. So, you know, we may have to address that. We'll just have to see when we get in there. Also paid for the big fill plug on the back, and there's a drain plug on the bottom. So all those were optional things that I paid for. You can also, if you're planning on running coilovers straight off the get-go, you can actually have them delete the pockets here for your coil springs, so you won't have those on there. That'll save you a little weight and just a little stuff getting in your way. I do plan on running coilovers at a later time, but for now it's just stock suspension in this thing. So now, if you're just a quick performance fanboy, fret not, because it turns out these companies work together. Because my center section, although I ordered it from Trick Chassis, was actually assembled and drop shipped from Quick Performance. So here's what we got going on here, guys. I've got a billet 1350 yoke. I've got a billet pinion support. Those are all upgrades. I've got the through bolt style aluminum Yukon housing. We're running a 370 gear and a full spool. So to be honest, I really wanted to do a limited slip. I wanted to do a wave track, but that's like a $750 upgrade. I didn't have that money at this time, but what we may do in the future, because the center sections are a pretty easy swap out in these 9-inch rear ends. That's why so many people run them. So what we may do in the future, once I get back to work and funds get rolling in again, is we may actually have an entirely different center section built with a little bit more highway friendly gear and a wave track rear end. And that'll be something like, if I want to do drag week or something like that, we can just swap out the center sections, and it won't be that bad. But I mean, I wouldn't daily drive a spool. They suck. As we found out with this guy, it eats tires, it chirps around corners. It's really kind of dangerous in the rain. But you know, for a drag week or something like that, I mean, you can put up with it that long. But that's what we got over here on the housing and the center section. Now, as far as the axles, we went with some pretty beefy, strange axles. These are 35 spline axles, which should be more than enough to get this car down in the low fives, mid to low fives, without having to worry about any breakage. Now, this thing also uses these special bearings right here, so you don't have to use a separate axle tube seal. The bearings that get pressed onto these axles, I don't know, I hope you can see that. There's actually a rubber seal that goes all the way around the outside, so that seals the outside of the axle tube when you push your, seals the outside of the axle tube when you push your axle in. And then it's got the axle seal right here on the front. So we're actually going to take these in a few minutes. I don't have a press, so Ray's on his way over here. We're going to take these to a shop down the road and go ahead and get our bearings pressed on. If you do have a press in your shop or your garage, then good for you. You won't have to go pay somebody 20 bucks to press these things on. I'm not that lucky. Have not purchased a press yet. Don't know where the hell I would put it if I did purchase one. So we're going to have to pay to have it put on. But that's where I'm at right now, guys. We're going to go ahead and start this process now that you kind of know what's going on with it, and get this thing put in. I do want to say this. We do not have brakes yet for the end of this. And you're going to need to know what kind of brakes you're going to run before you have those bearings pressed on your axles. Because some brakes, the retaining plate, the bearing retaining plate, has to be pressed on with the bearings. The brakes that I'm ordering, they do not. They actually have a cutout, so we can go ahead and assemble the rear end, put the axle tubes in and everything, and then our plate will slip over the axle tube. You'll see that in a separate video when I've actually got the brakes here. I also want to say, guys, I did not pay extra for the powder coat. We just shot it with some satin black paint, some primer, and then paint. So, you know, this thing's going under a car. It's going to get beat on. So, we're building a race car here, not a show car. We went ahead, opened up the center section. We made a little cardboard piece to cover this while we were painting it. So, the first thing you're going to want to do, there is a lot of, you know, just residue and metal shavings, things like that inside from the construction process on this rear end. So what we're going to do, I'm going to take my air compressor, I'm going to blow through this tube to blow stuff out. Then I'm going to shove a rag in this tube. We're going to blow from this end, and the idea is to get everything here in the center, and we're just going to vacuum it out. And after we do that, we'll probably push a rag through each side just to be sure we got at least most of the stuff out. Now, something I was kind of disappointed with, I paid $20 extra for this lube locker gasket. You can see how messed up it is. This was after I spent quite a bit of time straightening it back out. It actually shipped with the center section, and it just got totally mangled in shipping. So, I don't know if you can see here, but there's quite a few areas like that in it, kinks. And so I've got my doubts as to whether or not it's going to seal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, I mean, I'm sure it'll flatten out when I torque everything down. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some ultra black Permatex here, gasket maker. And we're just going to put like just a thin coat on both sides. You know, we're going to put a thin coat on here. I'm going to put the gasket on, and then we'll put a thin coat on top of the gasket. Oh, sorry about dropped it. And then we'll set the center section on and just kind of pull it to. And we got to let this stuff set up for about 30-45 minutes, and then come back in here and torque everything down. Okay, best I can tell, if you're using one of these lube locker gaskets, you want the riding to be facing you, and to the left of the axle here. We're going to try to set the center section in. Okay. Got to get past that gasket. There we go. Yep. Get my dead blow.
You gotta have your hammer, stick that dead blow right there on.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Fantastic idea. start back here because those are down further than this is. Little advice, guys. Dry fit your center section first. That way you can mark the studs that are giving you trouble and go around and maybe tap them in with a hammer before you do your final assembly. I made a mistake. I should have done that. Let me do this. Let me put threads on the ones that are up real good. That way I'm not just flopping it side to side. Need a wrench for that. All right, we're going to wait about 30 minutes and then we're going to come back and snug them all up real good. So we're going to go ahead and torque these down to 35 foot-pounds now, except for these two on the bottom. There's really no way to get a torque wrench in there to them. I could use a swip or a universal joint, but it's going to throw off the torque reading anyway. So I'm going to torque the rest of them to 35 and then I'll come back and just hit these guys with a wrench, snug them up real good. We are ready to bolt our torque arm bracket on now. Right up there. So that's the Moser style torque arm bracket. And this is what I was worried about stuff lining up when we were painting this thing. Alright guys, I couldn't find a torque spec on these bolts, so about 5 Ugga Duggas is what it got. Now, I don't know if I caught it on camera or not. You might notice that this is propped up against here right now, but well, can you even see that? Yeah, you can see it. We got a call from the shop that the axles were ready. And I reached up to turn the camera off, and this thing fell off the jack stands and just slammed on the ground. I'm not sure if I got it on camera or not. If I did, you'll see it. But yeah, we're definitely gonna have to do some touch-up painting on it now. Scuffed it up pretty good in a few spots, but anyway, the center section is in. Everything's torqued down. Our torque arm bracket is on. So next thing we got to do is shove our axles in. Here's our 35 spline axles I showed you guys earlier. You can see they press these bearings on, press the wedding ring on, and you can see there's actually a seal right here on the front of the bearing, and then there's a seal around the outside of the bearing here that seals to the axle tube. So you don't have to run separate axle tube seals with these, but what I am going to do is first I've got to run my lugs in here, and then I'm probably just going to put just a little layer of Permatex gasket maker around the outside here before we bang these in. Now this takes a screw-in stud. These are 1/2 inch studs, 3 inches long. So you just want to thread them in from the back there, and I'm going to run them up with my little baby impact. So here we go. I'm going to slide our first axle in, get it engaged in the splines in there. Somewhere.
You're right, pick it up.
Just like that. And like I said, I'm just going to put me a thin coat of Permatex around the back side of this, just in case. I mean, you really shouldn't have to do this, but it's just a little extra leak precaution. Sorry guys, I had to switch batteries in the camera, but anyway, so I got my RTV around there, just a really thin coat. And we'll go ahead, slide this back in here like this, and we'll take us a piece of wood and tap our axle in. We don't have a retainer plate right now. That's going to come with our brake kit, but the retainer plate will go over this. It'll have a little cutout for that axle, or for that bearing, and should just push it on in there. And that is it for the assembly. Time to move on with the installation, but first we've got to get the old rear end out. Now, dropping the rear end in this thing, even with basic hand tools, is actually a pretty simple endeavor. But doing it with a few power tools makes it a fast endeavor too. I'm just going to start by removing the wheels. Then moving under the car, we're going to take all of our drive shaft bolts loose out of the universal joint at the rear end. Then I'm just going to pop the drive shaft out. I'm just going to leave it in the back of the transmission, but rotate it off to the side so it's not in my way. Now, if you've got a plug to put in the back of the transmission, or if you've got the back of the car up considerably further than the front of the car, you could go ahead and pull the drive shaft all the way out, and it won't be in your way, and you shouldn't leak much fluid. As a matter of fact, I think that's what I'm going to do. Try to find my block off plug, and that way I can just get the drive shaft out of here. So with my drive shaft out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and drop my sway bar brackets back here so I can rotate my sway bar down and get a jack under here, because when we go to take the torque arm loose, the rear end is going to want to try to tilt up a little bit. Maybe it's going to want to move around. So before we take any of that loose, we need to make sure we've got a jack under here. Get all of our hardware out of the way. We're not going to be reusing this on the new rear end because we have our brackets that are already welded on. Also, I was calling this a sway bar. This is actually a adjustable anti-roll bar from UMI. It's meant primarily for drag racing applications. So very similar to a sway bar, but it has a slightly different purpose, and the end links are fully adjustable. I actually have a video on installing this sway bar and how to adjust it, so you can check that out in the Chaos Theory Camaro playlist. As far as the jack goes, you can use whatever jack you want. I'm choosing to use my Harbor Freight transmission jack here. The important thing is, you know, whether you just use your regular hydraulic jack or whatever, you just want to go ahead at this point and get something under here to support the rear end while you start taking all the suspension components loose. Now at this point, I'm going to take the front of my torque arm loose. And after I knock this bolt out, it's going to want to go all the way up and hit the floorboard. So just be aware of that. Depending on how much tension you have on the rear end, you know, that's going to kind of dictate how much force there is on the sway bar going up. But it's not anything you can't control, guys. It's not something general that's going to rip your arm off or anything. Oh, and actually, mine didn't even move at all that time. Yeah. Actually, mine's wanting to go down right now. So, like I said, guys, it's not an amount of force that's going to rip your arm off. I know a lot of people make it out like these things are under a tremendous amount of force. They are when you're launching the car, but they're not, you know, normally. So, anyway, now we're going to move to the back. At the bottom, we've got our nuts here and here. We're going to remove those. And it looks like we're going to have to get a wrench on the bolt at the top. I thought it would hold itself, but that's not happening. So it looks like we're at about a 13/16 on top. By the way, guys, these aren't that hard to get to. It's just hard to get to without getting in the way of the camera. So, there we go. Got those out. We're just going to pull our long bolts out through the top. One. There's two. As I said, there's also some forward force on our rear end, trying to tilt it down a little bit. So just be aware of that. When this does come loose, your rear end is probably going to just clunk down at an angle all of a sudden. So make sure you're out of the way, but don't let it freak you out too bad. Moving right along to our lower control arms. We're going to take those loose back here at the axle. And pull the bolts out. There are some spacers in here that are probably going to fall out. There we go. We'll just run these back in here so everything doesn't fall apart. Then with that out of the way, you can go ahead and take your bolt loose for your shock here. And again, might need a wrench on here to hold it. You might need the right wrench, because that's obviously not it. repeat that on the other side, and then I'll be back. Now if we come around to the back of the car, we've got our panhard bar. We just need to take it loose. You don't have to take it loose at both sides, but I'm going to go ahead and take it loose here and up there just to get it out of the way. Now this is one of the first things on these cars that people generally replace when they're doing suspension, but it's actually the least important. So as far as rigidity goes, that's why we've replaced everything else, but we haven't really messed with the cheapest and most common and easiest thing to replace, which is the panhard bar. I will be upgrading it later on, but like I said, as far as things go in the list of what you should upgrade first, this should be at the back of your list, guys. I know it's easy and it's pretty, and that's why everybody wants to do it first, but yeah, just so you know. Just pry it out with a screwdriver, and I'm just going to take it loose at the other end. At this point, there are no more hard parts holding your axle in. The only thing we have left to do is disconnect the brake line, and we're just going to disconnect the main brake line right there, and then we're going to have to disconnect our emergency brake cables, and we're going to disconnect them up under the car on both sides of the back of the transmission tunnel. You can see that's just forward of the yoke there. We're going to disconnect them there, and we're probably just going to disconnect them right here, guys, and kind of let this be here, because the brake kit that I have ordered does not have an emergency brake, but the brake kit I plan to run in the future does. So I don't want to pull all my hardware out. I'm just going to disconnect the lines. Well, okay, I see. The best place to disconnect it would probably be right here, and just let these lines leave with the axle. So yeah, that's what we'll do. So the brake lines are disconnected. I've started lowering the rear down just to give me a little better, or a little easier access to the main brake line. So I'm just going to keep lowering the rear end down. You want to be careful when you do this. Your springs will come out of the pockets and fall over eventually. So it's not a big deal. You can just let them fall. Just don't let them hit you in the head. You can see my rear end's totally loose at this point. We're going to get our pull springs out of the way. So I'm just going to do this, and now I can reach up here and I can easily get to my main brake line. So I'm going to pull the clip on it, unscrew it. I'll just put a vacuum cap on it for now, since we don't have our brakes in yet, and we'll get this puppy on out of here. There we are, the old and the new, sitting there side by side. Now I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but I did order this rear end a 1/2 inch narrower on each side, and the reason for that was because most people will agree, if you're running a 15x10 wheel, the optimum backspace is 6 inches. Well, most budget series wheels are only available in half sizes, like 5.5 inch, 6.5, 4.5. You get the idea. So my idea here was, by narrowing this a 1/2 inch on each side, I'm able to run my 15x10s with a 5.5 inch backspace, and it essentially makes it the same as if I was running a 6 inch backspace on a stock width. So that's going to allow me to use more budget line wheels, so I don't have to go out and pay $350 per wheel for welds or something like that. I can get away with the Jegs wheels or the Vision wheels, something like that. It was just something I was thinking about. If I do want to get nicer wheels later, they're available in all sizes, but the cheaper wheels, they're only available in 0.5 sizes. So that's going to help me out with that, give me a lot more options as far as what wheels I can run. The only thing we really need off the old rear end, we're going to have to take our shock mounts off. I think I'm going to leave you know, I've got the adjustable UMI LCA brackets on here. So I might just sell this rear end to somebody for like 150 bucks or something, and leave the UMI adjustable mounts on it. And then it's got the mini spool, 323 gears. Yeah, guys, it's the 28 spline axles. So if somebody lives in Knoxville and you're looking for a rear end, keep your eyes out on the Bad Luck Garage group page, because if I do decide to sell it, that's probably where I'll post it. But I wanted to address something. Somebody actually asked me the other day online when I posted a picture of this about the torque arm fitting up with this Mosier bracket. Guys, UMI actually, I think I said it in the beginning of this video, UMI actually specifies, they recommend if you're going to do a 9-inch that you use the Mosier bracket, and I just found out why. Because their torque arm actually fits this bracket better than it fit my factory bracket, or my factory rear end. Look at that, it slides right on, the holes line right up, I'm not having to hammer it, do anything. You can see the holes go right through, they line up perfectly. The difference is, because the bracket's offset this way, you're going to use the outside bolt holes here instead of the inside bolt holes. But it's not interfering with anything, it's not touching the rear end. You're going to have plenty of room for the drive shaft to spin and everything. So yeah, to the guy who asked me about that, 100% the torque arm works with this Mosier bracket and this trick chassis rear end. We got the old rear end on the ground. We got the new rear end strapped to our transmission jack. Guys, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm probably not going to talk much putting this in, because it's just the opposite of removal. We're just going to put it, jack it back up in there, hook the lower control arms up, hook the shocks up, set our springs in there before we do that. Got to point that out. Hook our torque arm bracket up, and that's going to be it. So unless I have an issue, like we may have an issue with tunnel clearance with the torque arm, but unless something like that comes up, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it in here real quick. If the torque arm or something else does come up and presents a problem, then I will stop and explain the problem and what I did about it. I was asked about too, if the torque arm with this rear end was going to cause any clearance issues. I'm here to tell you it looks good. You can see that's the factory emergency brake cable bracket there that we no longer are using, but it's got about a 1/2 inch of clearance there, and it looks like it will actually continue to go up beside of it just like it did with the factory rear end. I've got about the same amount of clearance all the way up through here. Now I do want to say, I'm not sure why, but there was a lot more tension on my torque arm here at the front. I had to really pull down hard on it to get it reattached at the front. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe the spring perches are just a little bit higher or something. But anyway, one thing I was really worried about is, would I be able to use the same drive shaft? And guys, you can see the gap there, just a little bit of gap. This is with the rear end fully extended now. It's not jacked up, but we've got probably 1.25 inches or more of tube sticking out there. And although I do not have the correct U-joint on it now, I just set it in there just for the time being to make sure the drive shaft was going to fit. Now this is a 1350 billet yoke on the 9-inch, as I explained earlier in the video. I'm not sure what size the factory U-joint is. I think it may be a 1340, but what we're going to do is knock this factory U-joint out and take it to the store and try to get a conversion U-joint that has 1350 yoke on on the end, and then has whatever this is on the other end. The only place where we might run into an issue is, I'm thinking when the rear end is up all the way, the corner of the torque arm here might make contact right here. I know some people have said that with other 9-inches they've put in, and even the S60 rear ends, but I won't know until I get the suspension compressed. So if I do have to, I think at the worst case scenario, I might have to take a mallet and, you know, beat a little dent in right here. Or honestly guys, I might just let it clearance itself, because if it does make contact, I don't think it's going to make much contact. So you got to think the way this thing pivots, you know, the pinion changes angle a little bit as it rides up and down. So it may not contact at all, because right now, I don't know what the camera shows, but I mean, you can see I got clearance to put my hand in there pretty good. But anyway, so all this up here is done. Now I'm moving on to the adjustable anti-roll bar. I think that's pretty much about all I've got left. Because I couldn't use the U-bolts anymore, I did have to go buy some hardware for my my anti-roll bar. Now if you're just using a regular sway bar, you could get some smaller hardware than this, but because this is an anti-roll bar and it's going to be subjected to a lot of load when we're launching this car hard, I decided to go ahead and step up the hardware a little bit. So what I got was, everything's grade 8. I got some 7/16 by 14 thread 1 1/4 inch bolts. I got 4 of those. I also got the matching nuts and lock washers here. And because I'm stepping up the hardware to a larger size, I am going to have to drill these holes out on these pads to allow me to put those in. So I'm going to get those drilled out, and then we'll roll our anti-roll bar back up here and get it bolted up. The anti-roll bar is on. We also found the correct conversion joint to use our factory drive shaft. So the drive shaft in the 3rd gen, it uses what's called a 3R universal joint, and I went with the billet 1350 yoke. So I needed a universal joint, a bastard joint, to go from 3R to 1350, and we found it at Napa. It is part number UJ447. It's the same part number. If you get the Moog, it's also a 447. So if you're using the 1350 yoke on your 9-inch, then that's what you're going to need to use your factory drive shaft. Now, the only reason we're still using the factory drive shaft is because we do plan on upgrading the transmission at some point, and I don't want to have to pay for a custom drive shaft and then have to turn around and buy another custom drive shaft as soon as we upgrade transmission. So we're hoping, you know, with this beefier U-joint, that this drive shaft will hold up for at least a little while. With that being said, the only thing left to do is to fill this guy with fluid. You can see we paid for the optional fill, the big fill cap up here. If you didn't pay for that, you're going to need to fill the side of the side of the 3rd member right there. Not sure if you can see that hole, but it's there, I assure you. There we go, a little light. Now you can see the hole right there. So the idea is you want to put fluid in until it just starts to seep out of that hole. So you can pump it in through the hole, or you can use the big fill cap that we've got on the top of the back of the case here. So just showing you guys the fill procedure. You can actually fit right between, or right above the panhard bar here with the rear end fully extended, and just squeeze the fluid in. So it took just shy of 3 quarts to fill this thing up. Now the last thing I need to address is the vent here on the axle tube. Now what you really want to do is get you a piece of fuel line or something like that, and the best thing to do would be to get like a little axle vent. They actually sell them at the auto parts store, and maybe run your line up and pin it up somewhere up there. That way if you're going around a corner hard or something like that, you don't puke any fluid out. But for the time being, I don't have one. I am going to go back and do it off video when I get one, but I've got this little, it was kind of like a valve cover vent breather thing. We're just going to stick that on there for now, just to make sure that no contaminants or anything get drawn into the axle. So I'm just going to stick him on there like that, and I'll tighten my clamp up. That'll be good. Later this week, I'll get me some hose and get the proper vent to put on there, and as I just said, I'll probably tack it up there somewhere. Just make sure that you leave enough slack in it so that your axle can articulate up and down without pulling the line loose. Well, it's been a long video, but the rear end is in the car. The only thing left to do at this point is the break-in procedure. So here's what they say. They want you to drive it for 15 minutes, no aggressive driving, then let it rest for about 30-45 minutes to cool down. They want you to repeat that a total of 5 times. After that, we're going to drain the fluid back out, refill it with some fresh gear oil, and we should be good to rip. Now again, I want to give a huge shout out to Matt Walter at Walter Racecraft for hooking me up with this rear end. If you guys want to order one of these rear ends from him, I will put a link to his website in the description of this video. He also sells what he calls the Poor Kid Kit to do LS swaps on 3rd gen Camaro, so definitely click on the link, check it out. Now the next video you see on this car will most likely be me doing the brakes. We're just waiting on them to get here, so we're going to do a separate video on that. After the brakes get installed, we're going to go ahead and take this thing, get the brake end done on the rear end, and hopefully start dialing in the tune with the new Holley intake and the snake eater injectors. So I know this has been a really long video, but I wanted to make sure I got everything in there, from assembly to pulling the old rear to putting the new rear end in. So hopefully, if you guys are wanting to know what this procedure involves, this video shows you every single step. If you want to know more about this particular car, just like all the project vehicles on this channel, it has its own playlist. It's the Chaos Theory Camaro playlist, and everything we've done to this car up until this point has been on video. So make sure you check out that playlist, then get out in the garage, get something done, And I'll see you next time here on Bad Luck Garage.